College football nerds talking Ohio State and Penn State. That's right. We've got a week of football that we actually got to see from the Big Ten. And now we're going to talk about some previews with a little bit of data for once. That was really tough last week. We got through it. Y'all are there with us. Obviously, I got Josh with me, and we're going to get nerdy. I want to remind you first, please hit that like and subscribe button, notification bell. It helps us out a ton. But also in the comments, as usual, give us your score prediction. We'll mix it up with you down there. All right, Josh, we didn't do Indiana and Penn State last week. We didn't cover that game. But the Ohio State fans remember one of the things that we discussed was, look, y'all, take it from our experience, from doing previews already for a month now, it's going to get weird. In the first week or two in conference play, which is opening for all play for y'all, it's going to get weird. You're going to have unpredictable results that happen. And a lot of that is due to COVID. Some of it's because offenses are ahead of defenses. Some of it is just because the ball's bouncing funny right now. And people aren't working out all the wrinkles yet. And I think some of that happened with Penn State and Indiana. But also, I mean, when we were looking at the numbers, comparing notes before the game, I don't want Indiana fans to take much away, Penn State fans to take much away from that loss and put it on the Ohio State prediction or preview, because they really should have won that game. They dominated that game statistically, and I want you to unpack that a little bit before we really get into this preview about how, that result was sort of in its own isolation, and we don't need to take a whole lot from it.
There's a lot that can be done with advanced statistics in terms of evaluating the efficiency of an offense, the explosiveness of an offense, and the things that went right and wrong. This game is sort of a microcosm of all of those things. So Penn State's predictive win probability against Indiana is 100%. If you look at the box score from, I think this is college football data, so this is win expectancy based on efficiency-based metrics, it's actually 100%. And if you followed it on ESPN, when Penn State got the ball at the end of the game, it was 98.8% chance of win. There's a reason that it's 0.8 and 98.8. This game is the 1%. And we talk a lot about in ESPN's odds to win a conference title metrics and things like that. It frequently grossly underestimates teams like Ohio State and like Alabama, who actually win their conference at a much higher clip than is predicted. And the reason is there are so many games like this one where you have a team that's likely to succeed that kind of blows it. And the metrics have this built-in, weirdness factor, if you want to call it that. And how do you have a game where you have Penn State with 100% likeliness to win where they lose? Well, one is something on points per opportunity. So Penn State had 8 scoring opportunities and they scored 21 points. It's 2.6 yards points per opportunity, less than a field goal per scoring opportunity. Indiana was at 5.4. So right off the bat, when Indiana was in scoring position, they scored twice as many points as Penn State did. The second thing is not only were there turnovers, but there were turnovers in crucial situations at the worst possible way, at the worst possible time. Those all resulted for points for Indiana, and that allowed them to score a much greater percentage than would be indicated by advanced stats. And the other thing I will say is when they did score, they did it in chunks. So this was a long game with a lot of possessions. I think we're 12 or 13 possessions in the game. Indiana had a 0% standard down success rate in the first quarter and the third quarter. 0% period success rate in the first quarter. They had a 60% success rate in the second quarter, higher than Penn State was at any point in the game. So basically, Indiana was really successful in the second quarter, going up 17-7, and then hung on for dear life for the rest of the game and got a little bit of scoring opportunity off turnovers, and then they did well in the red zone, including in overtime. And that's how they won. But from a predictive sense, let me just look at success rate. Penn State's at 49%, Indiana's at 33%. Now, if you compare that, getting back to this game here, Ohio State, Nebraska, Ohio State was at 60% overall success rate, and Nebraska was at 58%. There was only a 2% gap between success rates in Ohio State and Nebraska in their game, and there was a 16% gap between Penn State and Indiana. So from a lot of forward-looking metrics, in a lot of ways, Penn State was more betterer, if you want to call it that, than Indiana, than Ohio State was to Nebraska. And of course, that doesn't bear out in the score at all, but it's a really, really weird result That, I mean, as I said on Twitter, welcome to 2020 Big Ten.
And on the flip side of that, you're talking about Ohio State and Nebraska. We were all over that game. I think I said like 48-17 or 47-17. I think you said 48-20. Like we were really close on that game, and it turned out one of the few predictable results that we've seen this year. And what encouraged me, if I'm an Ohio State fan, beyond the fact that Fields looked great, I think he was 20 of 21, and the one incompletion was a dime. So for me, and tell me what you think about this, not to turn it over too quick to you, but we liked what we saw from Alabama and Clemson in week one, because with the world falling down around them in terms of all the craziness happening in the Big 12, LSU to losing to Mississippi State, those two teams look like it was a normal year for them, and that was encouraging. Did you see some of the same from Ohio State in that it just looked like same order of business as if it was 2019 or 2018?
I did, and you talk about being all over the game. One of the things we said is that Nebraska would get, I think I had them in the low 20s, some decent amount of points on sort of cheap junk plays. And you saw that early in the game. I mean, there were busts. There were struggles to maintain the edge. Martinez had a pretty good rushing average. McCaffrey had a great rushing average in the game. But at the end of the day, they restricted scoring opportunities. The defense looked pretty well put together. They really, for about a quarter, you could tell that it was 2020, and then they settled down and they didn't give up a ton. And then offensively, it was business as usual. It definitely was the case that Nebraska was playing the run and not the pass. You can see that in the statistics. I think there's two things that I think Ohio State fans are overreacting to. One is the numbers Nebraska put up offensively. I'll say you just got to get used to the fact that if you're playing a spread team that is good in any area, and Nebraska is a very good run team, you're going to give up numbers, and there's no way to deal with that otherwise in the RPO. And the other side of it is that Ohio State's running game wasn't super productive statistically, but they were good, and I think Nebraska was playing the run and giving up the pass. But it was what we expected. And I felt like as the game wore on, Ohio State's balance showed. And when Nebraska was really keying on the run with their fits and all, Ohio State was able to just compensate, play business as usual, get stops when they needed to defensively, and win the ball game. And that's, again, you look at Penn State, Indiana, you look at what happened with Michigan, Minnesota. There aren't that many teams that have come out the gate looking like they're really prepared. I mean, and if you're an elite team and you're able to do that, you're kind of ahead on both levels.
And I think there was a little bit of frustration from Ohio State fans. They were actually hitting us up on Twitter during the game asking about the run game. And I don't think anybody had like over 4 yards of carry, something like that. It was not overly impressive. And what I wanted to say, and didn't, it's hard to do in a character limit. If we look at teams with elite offenses in the last few years, like Alabama, Oklahoma, LSU last year, there have been games where the run game was shut down, effectively, shut down. I think even Duke shut down or slowed down Alabama running the ball last year to open the season. I think I remember fighting with somebody about that on Twitter too. But for me, we've seen modern defenses, even in an era where college football, where offenses are just lighting up the scoreboard, modern defenses can shut down the run if they focus on it and if they dedicate themselves to it. And it's not necessarily just the old school load the box with 8 men. There's a lot of things that they do with their safety play and how they do their keys and their run fits that they can, if they want to, they can slow down a run game. So that didn't concern me, especially when I saw Justin Fields be able to get what he wanted in the passing game. And obviously Nebraska's strategy was, we're going to make you earn it through the air. But what we've found with these offenses like Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State is that they can make you earn it, or they can earn it through the air, and it really opens you up to explosive plays. Now, coming back to this game with Penn State, one of the things that we've seen where they've been competitive with Ohio State is that they've been able to shut down a little bit on both and play really good defense and keep that game in the 20s. We saw that last year with a not 100% Justin Fields, where they were in that game for, I think, 3.5 quarters because it was nasty weather. It was a good defensive game. Is there some concern that Penn State needs to win on defense, and against the really top teams in modern football, it doesn't matter how good your defense is because elite offense is going to put up 35 plus?
He asked this question because he already knows that what my opinion is. And my opinion is that absolutely. I think Penn State has a very good defense. And, we sort of shout out to him. Matt at Land Grant Holy Land had me on his show to talk about this. And the thing I said is, I'm really interested to see what you get out of Ohio State in this game, because I think defensively Penn State is really, really good. And I know they lost that game to Indiana, but they gave up points in overtime. They held Indiana to 211 yards of offense. Okay, so there was nothing going on offensively from Indiana. 1.6 yards per carry, 4.7 yards per attempt is putrid. And Indiana at times has been a decent offense in recent years. So you'd think, okay, well, that means it's going to be another slugfest. I don't really think so, because when you play offenses of this caliber, it kind of breaks things. And I think Ohio State is so balanced, and they're so good pass and run. And you saw late last year the passing game kind of really developed with Fields. I don't think you can keep them under 35 points. And I think it's very hard to keep them under 40. And it's just like when Alabama played Georgia, you've got the same problem here. The issue isn't can you stop Ohio State, because it's not happening. The issue is how much can you limit them? How many stops can you possibly get? How many turnovers can you generate to try to keep them in that like 30 to 40 point range? And just like we said in the prediction with Georgia and Alabama, my concern in that game was I didn't see any way Georgia was going to hold Alabama under 35 points. And I didn't think that Georgia could keep pace. You got the same problem here. Penn State is a great defense, but Ohio State is too balanced. And they faced a gimpy Fields last time they played in, like you said, crappy weather, and it really kind of limited Ohio State, but Ohio State was also in control for a decent chunk of that game. And I think this time they're getting the real version of Ohio State, and they're going to put up 35 plus, maybe 45 points. And that's giving Penn State credit defensively. They're still going to give up 35 to 45. So the problem in the modern era, when any elite offense can generate 35 to 45 points on absolutely any defense in the country, can you score 35? Period. And to me, that's the defining question of this game, because I'm not really, I know Ohio State's going to get theirs to a certain extent, or at least I'll be very surprised if they don't. I'll be curious where they get capped at. But I'm really concerned on how this is going to go if Penn State ends up in a shooting match and Penn State has to match the aggression of Ohio State. Because I feel like really pressing at the end of in the Indiana game is where things went off the rails, and that's, I think, the danger here.
And we saw this last year with Ohio State, where they had some slow starts. And I'm going off memory here, so y'all don't kill me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like Wisconsin in the conference championship game, Michigan State, I feel like they also got a really slow start, and Penn State, they got a slow start, and that was just an ugly game. What we've seen is, and this is the thing I always say when we cover an Alabama game against a team that can score some points, the concern with playing these elite teams is the games are super long. Every single stop you get is so monumental, because they're going to turn around at some point and grind you down, and you're going to look up. It's going to be like you give up 13 points in the first half and you'll still give up 40 in the game. We saw this with Alabama. I think they had 17 points with 26 seconds left in the second quarter against Georgia, and ended up with 41. And I'm going to this is the point I want to make to Ohio State fans that got at us on Twitter, because we said, and y'all know who you are. We said that Georgia has the best defense in the country. Full stop. It is true. They have the best defense in the country. Clemson is probably a close second. And we're not saying this SEC rah-rah-rah, because Alabama, we've killed Alabama for their defense. We did a whole video about how bad the SEC defense are this year. There is a difference between mediocre defenses giving up a lot of points to teams without a lot of talent, or teams that don't have great offenses. There's that. That's a thing where you can say you have a bad defense. And then there's teams that play elite offenses and they're going to give up points regardless of how good their defense is. And we're going to see that this Saturday. And I'm going to go ahead and give my prediction on this, and we can kind of talk through it a little bit after this. We're going to see this on Saturday, where the limiting factor in this game is going to be that Penn State won't be able to go 4 quarters matching them score for score. Even if Penn State gets up early, they're going to have drives that stall, and part of it is just I'm just not that confident in Clifford, and I'm not confident in their run game against the top defense. I think that we're going to see Ohio State show that this is their game, where they show that they're a playoff team. And I think I know Ryan Day apologized for the last touchdown he scored, but style points matter, and I think we know that this year. So I'm going to give my score 42-23 Ohio State. Give me yours, and let's talk about it.
My score is 38-17 Ohio State, and it pretty much echoes everything you just said. Going back to our opener talking about the Penn State-Indiana game, the issue for Penn State really wasn't defensive at all. And the issue was totally offensive. And I think everybody sort of realizes that. But what was hidden in the numbers is Penn State on a per-play basis did pretty well. 4.8 yards per carry, which is good. 6.8 yards per attempt, which was not great, but passable, not great. But it amounted to 488 yards of offense. What I think is notable, though, is how much it took to get there. They had a good third down conversion percentage. They were on schedule, but there wasn't a lot of pop, and they couldn't afford a lot of negative plays. That, I think, kind of happened because they ended up in a hole, and it made their offense disjointed, made them feel like they had to press, and they didn't really stay balanced, or they would have generated more points in the second half and climbed out of that hole and put it away, which they almost did. I think that issue magnifies in this game tremendously. I don't know how big the yardage differential is going to be between the two teams, but personally, I think what's going to happen is Penn State's going to move the ball well enough to sort of frustrate some Ohio State fans and to feel like you're moving it, and they're going to move it not score enough to frustrate Penn State fans. Whereas Ohio State is just going to be that little bit clip better, but the balance, the explosiveness, and the, I would say, effective modernization of the offense will mean Ohio State is explosive and continues to score. And there's some, possibilities. I think, that Ohio State may have some people out for this game, and I get all of that. But at the end of the day, I feel like Ohio State runs the RPO style offense at a very high level. And I feel like with Clifford, Penn State sort of struggles to do it, and they only can run it effectively when they're staying balanced and they're on schedule and the opportunity presents itself. And yeah, they can run Clifford and get some third down conversions. Yeah, they can put up some yardage, and that's going to happen in the game, but it's not going to happen enough to score a ton. And when they get in the position where they have to throw, and Ohio State knows they're throwing the ball, one of the more glaring statistics from that Nebraska game, on passing downs, Nebraska had an 11% success rate, and Nebraska did not have a single successful passing down play in the first, third, or fourth quarter. So I think this down and distance situation is going to take this game that, like you said, grinds out and ends up being very long, and somewhere in that late second, mid third quarter range, this game's just going to get totally away from Penn State.
And I do think that Penn State is a good bit better than Nebraska. I think they would beat Nebraska easily. They're better at quarterback and they're better on defense, the two things that really matter in a game like this. The problem is they're not good enough to get past these stall points that we talked about in the past, which is exactly what we saw with Georgia, where Georgia's elite on defense. They're okay on offense. I mean, they got a good, not great offense. Alabama has a defense that can be exploited with a really good quarterback. So they had that one piece that wasn't all there. Not even a terrible quarterback, just not all there. Can't take advantage of the fact that your game plan changes when a team scores 2, 3, 4 times in a row. Even if if you come out 10-0, you're out ahead of them, and then you trade a couple of shots, but you see they're efficiently scoring in multiple drives, that changes your approach. And that's where I don't think that Penn State's going to have that ability to go blow for blow with them. Like you said, they're going to hit a tipping point second or third quarter where we see that one of these teams is better than the other. Obviously, this is our opinion, but talk about how for Penn State, where let's say this game goes the way we think it's going to go. In this season, it's funny because given all of the COVID stuff, Big Ten fans are really freaked out about their short schedule impacting where they're going to be postseason, where they're going to be in the rankings. They're going to get unfairly dinged for the fewer games. In my mind, Penn State can start out 0-2. They're not a playoff team, but they've got everything else ahead of them. Like they're not going to win the Big Ten if they start out 0-2. But they're not going to, like, they still can have a top 10 season. I don't think they're going to get crushed for that Indiana game come bowl selection time or even final ranking time like they would have in any other year. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think it is fair to say, and I'm going to keep talking as I pull up this stat, but the reality is there's just not going to be that many teams that have clean win-loss records. And looking at the SEC right now, you only have 4 teams, only 4 SEC teams out of 14 have less than 2 losses to this point. And of those, Florida and Georgia play each other. So you're going to end up with guaranteed 3 or less by the end of the year. So if you go 6-2, you're going to be compared, like, at that point, you're not really any worse off than the top 2 or 3 teams in most conferences. Everybody's going to have losses. Having 2 losses in a lot of years, I mean, always 10-2 is a good record. But you think, well, this is just 6-2. But even with 8-10 games, teams are losing like crazy due to the variability and unpredictable nature of this season. I'm totally with you. I think maybe the playoff is off the table if you lose to Ohio State. Just reasonably is, given this limited number of games and whatnot. But in terms of a BCS bowl, absolutely. It's absolutely on the table. And in any way, a playoff slot was probably always off the table if you lose to Ohio State. Even if you only had 1 loss, that was probably just not going to happen at that point. So, I don't think there's a whole lot to take away if you lose this game. And quite frankly, maybe this is the other way to put it. If you lose to Ohio State and win out the rest of the way, would you agree with this? The Indiana game is not going to matter at all. You're going to get the same bowl seeding that you would have at 6-2 than you would have at 7-1, especially if you win out the rest of the season, which is entirely doable for Penn State.
Yeah, and talking about those SEC teams, there's also Auburn and I think LSU's only got 2 losses, in Alabama. All those teams play each other too. So, and we've seen what's going on with the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma State has looked really pedestrian and is slotted right now for a playoff spot, like the way the numbers are shaking out. I mean, it's just a weird year, and I think people are having a hard time getting their head around that. You posted something on Twitter that was like, look, you go 5-5 in the SEC this year, you think that's a horrible season, but in a normal year, you go 4-4 in the SEC, win your other 4 games, like that's 8-4. That's not a bad year, right? Like, so I think we've got to look at this year differently. 1, and just appreciate the fact that we have football at all. 2, understand the Big Ten starting this late with 8 games. This is probably where they do get dinged, in that they were never going to get 2 teams in the playoffs. It just was not going to happen, especially with, like, if Alabama and Georgia play again and Georgia wins that game, those are the 2 teams that from one conference that are probably going to go. There's no way you get Clemson, Notre Dame winner in the ACC, 2 out of the SEC, 1 from the Big Ten guaranteed. Like, the number crunch is just there. So the super shortened season did probably, signal the death of any hopes of getting 2 Big Ten teams in. But like you said, if you weren't ever going to beat Ohio State this year, especially with the opt-outs that Penn State's had, like really key opt-outs, then everything else you were playing for this season is on the table. Everything else that meant that was there for the taking in a normal year where you lost to Ohio State is there for the taking. So I don't want them to get too discouraged. Real quick, before we wind this down, on the flip side, we've been singing the praises of Ohio State a lot. And I'm curious, did you see anything Saturday that would give you pause, give you any concern when comparing what you've seen so far from Clemson, Alabama, even Georgia with that good defense? Or are they up there just Death Star with the top couple of teams for you?
There is a little concern for me in that their line play was not dominant. And I can't say that every other team has been spotless. Alabama's defensive line is not overly good. They're good. They are good, but they're not great, much less elite. Clemson's line play on the defensive side of the ball is often flashes elite. I'm not sure their offensive line is as good as it has been. I'm not sure why, but the run game is generally quite successful. But really, on both sides of the line of scrimmage, they were not dominant. I think that was more circumstance in the way Nebraska plays football, but it is something to kind of watch because, when you're it's one thing to give up some chunk plays to Nebraska and struggle a little bit against the run in Nebraska. It's forgivable and it doesn't matter in a 52-17 win. But the level of those sorts of errors, if it was a more dangerous opponent, if they were playing an elite opponent like a Clemson, you would have given up 300 to 400 yards on the ground to Clemson. And I think the lack of a run game, the way the offense is built, if the run game can be contained with 4, then Ohio State's passing game is going to struggle a lot just because schematically it really needs the run game to work for the passing game to kind of function. So that would be my area of concern, but we're one game in and it was so effective in the passing game and Nebraska was so limited in their scoring ability. I don't really take a lot more from that.
And pro tip for y'all that are watching, we put the bad news in the back because the only people that are watching at this point are the people that love us regardless of what we say. So that's why we put it back there. All right, y'all, thanks so much for hanging with us this long. Remember, score prediction in the comments. Y'all have a great week and God bless.